Welcome to the Mormons, Moonmen, and Other Space Inhabitants video. Isaiah 45:18. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He created it not in vain, he formed it to be inhabited. Now many people in the 19th century, many religious people, and including the Mormons, believe that this would apply to the other planets in the solar system, that it was not created in vain, that it was formed to be inhabited. There is scarcely any doubt now remaining in the philosophical world that the moon is a habitable globe. This according to Adam Clarke, The Holy Bible, with a commentary and critical notes, 7 volumes, 1811 Bible commentary. Clarke's commentary went through many editions and enjoyed great popularity in the early 19th century. And we know that Joseph Smith had access to this Bible commentary because he used it in his Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. And Adam Clarke suggested that we are led to infer that all the planets and their satellites or attendant moons are inhabited. For matter seems only to exist for the sake of intelligent beings. So going back to that Isaiah quote. So a lot of people in the 19th century thought that the moon and the sun and all the planets in the solar system were inhabited. And the Mormons were no different. And this is from Robert Burton, The Anatomy of Melancholy, 3 volumes, 1932. Okay, and now from Emanuel Swedenborg. There are Earths inhabited by men, not only in this solar system, but also out of it in the starry heavens. So other solar systems outside of our solar system are also inhabited by men, to an immense number. Where there is an earth, there are men, for man is the end for which every earth was created, and nothing was made by the great Creator without an end. So it was not made in vain. They're going back to that Isaiah quote. Emanuel Swedenborg, The Earths in Our Solar System. And Joseph Smith probably did read the works of Swedenborg as well, because we know that some of his theology, like the 3 degrees of glory, came from there. 1951. Okay, we go to Thomas Paine in the popular book The Age of Reason, which came out in 1794. He said, "The immensity of space will appear to us to be filled with systems of worlds, and that no part of space lies at waste. The Creator made nothing in vain." So saying the same thing as Isaiah. He's just elaborating on how many worlds this could be. Okay, we have Brigham Young here in General Conference, 1854. He said, "Every world has had an Adam and an Eve, named so simply because the first man is always called Adam, and the first woman is Eve. Every world that has been created upon the same principle." So similar to our worlds. Okay, and we go to Joseph Smith's Book of Moses, and it says, "And by the word of my power have I created them, and worlds without number have I created." Worlds without number. "And I also created them for my own purpose." So kind of similar to saying that they weren't created in vain. Okay, and we have right out of the Doctrine and Covenants an idea that there is no space in which there is no kingdom. So you look out into space, goes out, 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 and all of that space, there are kingdoms. So let's read this passage. "All kingdoms have a law given, and there are many kingdoms, for there is no space in which there is no kingdom, and there is no kingdom in which there is no space, either a greater or a lesser kingdom, and unto every kingdom is given a law." Okay, let's go back to the Book of Moses. "There are many worlds that have passed away by the word of my power, and there are many that now stand, and innumerable are they unto man, but all things are numbered unto me, for they are mine, and I know them. And as one earth shall pass away, and the heavens thereof, even so shall another come." So some worlds come into existence, then they go away, and the new ones come, and it's a cycle that goes on and on, on and on and on. "And there is no end to my works." Let's go back to the Doctrine and Covenants. And this is the olive leaf revelation, which becomes poetic in its description of God's creation. Says, "The earth rolls upon her wings, and the sun giveth his light by day, and the moon giveth her light by night. And the stars also give their light, as they roll upon their wings in their glory, in the midst of the power of God. The question is posed, unto what shall I liken these kingdoms, that ye may understand? The answer is given in the form of a parable, in which a farmer visits his servants one at a time, working in different areas of a field. Therefore the parable concludes, unto this parable I will liken all these kingdoms, so the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the inhabitants thereof. So all these different kingdoms out in space, and the inhabitants thereof, it says. Interesting. So exegetically, the parable asserts that the earth, sun, moon, and stars are inhabited, and it was precisely this way that early Mormons understood it. And the Apostle Orson Pratt made a comment about the previous passages in Doctrine and Covenants. And this is the way he interpreted it. He said, consider the planets of our solar system, namely Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Are these made for nothing? So again, the idea that they are not made in vain. No. What has the Lord said to us Latter-day Saints concerning these planets? He says all these are kingdoms to which he has given laws. So he's referring to that Doctrine and Covenants passage. And he likens these worlds or kingdoms unto a man having a field. This is Journal of Discourses 19, page 293. And now we have Apostle Oliver Cowdery in the Evening and Morning Star in 1833 saying, it is a pleasing thing to let the mind stretch away and contemplate the vast creations of the Almighty, to see the planets perform their regular revolutions and observe their exact motions, to view the thousands of suns, giving light to myriads of globes. So he's kind of thinking of our solar system and extrapolating out into space, moving in their respective orbits and revolving around their several axes, all inhabited by intelligent beings. So all these thousands of suns, these myriads of globes in their orbits, all inhabited by intelligent beings. Apostle Oliver Cowdery, Evening and Morning Star, 1833. Okay, so Orson Pratt had argued that all these are kingdoms to which God has given laws. That was in a previous slide. And then in 1875, he conjectured that in creating the various planets, that the Lord had a useful design in view, namely to add to his own glory and to the happiness of millions of his sons and daughters who should come to people these worlds. And that's worlds, plural. So lots of kingdoms out in space, lots of worlds. And God peoples them with his sons and daughters. Okay, the Deseret Weekly News, November 4th, 1893. It says, observation teaches us that other planets of the solar system resemble the Earth in many respects, and we therefore conclude that they are the residences of sensitive and rational beings. So they're talking about other planets in the solar system and that they resemble the Earth. So they must be the residences of sensitive and rational beings, aka humans, for none of the Creator's works are done in vain. Okay, we can look at the sand in the picture here, all those particles falling down, and then Joseph Smith, in his Book of Moses, one of the standard works of the church, the scripture says, were it possible that man could number the particles of the earth, yea, millions of earths like this, it would not be a beginning to the number of thy creations. And thy curtains are stretched out still, and yet thou art there. So he's out there in space, and thy bosom is there. Okay, in 1843, Joseph Smith wrote that the inhabitants of the worlds, that's plural, worlds, are saved by the very same Savior as ours. So I guess each one does not get their own Savior. Okay, so they're saved by the very same Savior as ours, by the very same truths, and the very same powers. Times and Seasons, 1843. Okay, we now have a statement from Prophet John Taylor, and he's talking about Enoch's city that was taken up into space or translated. Maybe they had a mission. And President John Taylor says, it would appear that the translated residents of Enoch's city are under the direction of Jesus, who is the creator of worlds. Well, that's plural, worlds. and that he, Jesus, holding the keys of the government of other worlds, could, in his administrations to them, select the translated people of Enoch's Zion, if he thought proper, to perform a mission to these various planets. So maybe the residents of Enoch City didn't just go up and float in space, but they had a mission to other humans on other planets. And then he continues, and as death has not passed upon them, they could be prepared by him and made use of through the medium of the holy priesthood to act as ambassadors, teachers, or messengers to those worlds over which Jesus holds the authority. This is from Prophet John Taylor, Meditation and Atonement of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, 1892. Okay, we now have a statement by the Apostle Orson Hyde, who said in 1857 that the sun, the moon, and the stars are the representatives of the final homes of the departed dead, if not their real homes. So those that have died, maybe their real homes is on the sun, moon, stars, somewhere in the solar system. Interesting comment, Journal of Discourses 572. Okay, we now have the Apostle Parley P. Pratt, who speculated that Adam and Eve had come to the earth from the sun. And we're going to have other comments by Brigham Young that the sun was inhabited, so it's not that preposterous for Parley P. Pratt to submit such a claim. And he said, thus a colony from heaven, it may be from the sun, is transplanted on our soil. So Adam and Eve living on the sun, kind of like a celestialized world. It's kind of how Mormon leaders described it. They didn't consider the heat, I guess. They didn't know about the heat. So a colony from heaven, it may be from the sun, is transplanted on our soil, the earth. So maybe that's where people came from. Parley P. Pratt, Key to the Science of Theology, 1855. So there are some accounts by people like Eliza R. Snow that talk about Joseph Smith mentioning where the 10 lost tribes went. And they mentioned that Joseph Smith taught that they went to the North Pole, but then got taken away into space, and we're not going to be able to find them. So this is from an Eliza R. Snow hymn in 1871, and she said, and when the Lord saw fit to hide the 10 lost tribes away, thou earth was severed, so kind of like a piece of the earth was broken off, to provide the orb on which they stay. So like a piece of the earth broke off, went out and became an orb, and that's where they stay, aka the 10 lost tribes. Okay, we have a statement here from the prophet Brigham Young in a sermon in the Journal of Discourses regarding the inhabitants of the moon and the inhabitants of the sun. He says, who can tell us of the inhabitants of this little planet that shines of an evening called the moon? So inhabitants on the moon. When we view its face, we may see what is termed the man in the moon. And when you inquire about the inhabitants of that sphere, you find that the most learned are as ignorant in regard to them as the most ignorant of their fellows. So inhabitants of the moon, of that sphere. So it is with regard to the inhabitants of the sun. Do you think it is inhabited? I rather think it is. Do you think there is any life there? There is no question of it. It was not made in vain. So going back to those previous quotes that we mentioned, it's got to be people living there. It's not made in vain. It was made to give light to those who dwell upon it and to other planets. And so will this earth when it is celestialized. So there's this idea that stars and suns out in the solar system and out in the universe are celestialized planets. And so maybe that's where those who are saved, they go to a glory that's similar to the sun. So it's celestialized. And then he says, every planet in its first rude organic state receives not the glory of God upon it, but is opaque, which I guess means dark. But when celestialized, every planet that God brings into existence is a body of light, but not until then. So it's kind of the idea that our dark and opaque planet can someday be celestialized and become like the sun or a star, and that's where people will live in the celestial kingdom. Okay, so we have a quote from Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith in the Doctrines of Salvation. He says, "We are not the only people that the Lord has created. We have brothers and sisters on other earths. We have brothers and sisters on other earths. They look like us because they too are the children of God and were created in his image, for they are also his offspring." Okay, a quote from a more modern apostle. This is Neil A. Maxwell. And I guess he had a book called A Wonderful Flood of Light in 1990. And he says, "We do not know how many inhabited worlds there are or where they are, but certainly we are not alone." So he's intimating that there are many inhabited worlds and that we are not alone. This is a universe of spiritual order in which Kolob is set nigh unto the throne of God. Okay, we now have a statement by Philo Dibble. "The inhabitants of the moon are more of a uniform size than the inhabitants of the earth, being about 6 feet in height. They dress very much like a Quaker in style, and are quite general in style, or the one fashion of dress. They live to be very old, coming generally near 1,000 years. This is the description of them as given by Joseph Smith the seer, and he could see whatever he asked the Father in the name of Jesus to see." Philo Dibble, unpublished transcript. It's in the Utah State Historical Society archives. All right, another statement by Prophet Brigham Young about the inhabitants on distant planets. And he said, "Why cannot we behold all things in space? Because there is a curtain dropped which makes them out of sight to us. Why cannot we behold the inhabitants in Kolob, which is God's planet or near God's planet, or the inhabitants in any of those distant planets?" So, or the inhabitants of any of those distant planets. Why can we not behold them? "For the same reason, because there is a curtain dropped that interrupts our vision." Prophet Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, 1853. Okay, another one from Joseph Fielding Smith, who was an apostle at the time in 1920. And this is out of the Improvement Era, The Origin and Destiny of Man, which I think later on became a book called Man, His Origin and Destiny, which was a popular book by Joseph Fielding Smith at the time. "Thus the Lord has given us the information regarding his creations, and how he has made many earths. For there never was a beginning, never was a time when man did not exist somewhere in the universe. And when the time came for this earth to be peopled, the Lord our God transplanted upon it from some other earth the life which is found here." So here's another idea. I think probably P. Pratt mentioned this, that Adam and Eve and the first man and woman on this earth was transplanted from another planet, another earth, which he says here. "Man he created in his own image. If it were our privilege to go out and visit some of the other creations, other worlds in space, we should discover that they are peopled with beings who look like us." Okay, so in the LDS Temple Endowment Ceremony, this is the 1990 version, there's a conversation between Elohim, which is God, Heavenly Father, and Lucifer. And Lucifer is mentioning other worlds, things that Elohim and Lucifer have done on other worlds, and we're just basically doing the same thing on this earth. So it's kind of interesting. This is about Lucifer getting expelled from the garden, and Elohim says, "Lucifer," and Lucifer returns, "What hast thou been doing here? I have been doing that which has been done on other worlds." So this earth was not the first time. Elohim and Lucifer have been maybe working together on other worlds and doing that which has been done on other worlds. Elohim says, "What is that?" And Lucifer says, "I have been giving some of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil to them." And Elohim says, "Lucifer, because thou hast done this, thou shalt be cursed above all the beasts of the field. Upon thy belly thou shalt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life." Then Lucifer says, "If thou cursest me for doing the same thing which has been done on other worlds," so there's that other worlds again, "I will take the spirits that follow me, and they shall possess the bodies thou createst for Adam and Eve." Okay, so the evidence just keeps adding up that Mormons in the 19th century believed that other planets in our solar system were inhabited, including the moon, the sun, and other planets, and planets outside of our solar system. So I'm just going to keep giving more and more evidence, more and more accounts to show this is what they believed. This is Stephen Post's patriarchal blessing given to him by Joseph Smith Sr., the first presiding patriarch, and this was Joseph Smith's father. This patriarchal blessing was in 1836, and he told Stephen, "For thou shalt not finish thy ministry upon this ball," and he meant this earth, "thou shalt preach to the people of other planets." So maybe being translated, taken up and doing missionary work to inhabitants of other planets, people on other planets. "And thou shalt preach to the spirits in prison" as well. And here's another statement from the prophet Brigham Young mentioning the inhabitants who live on the sun. And he said, "What is in the sun? Can astronomers tell us who lives there? No. Astronomers say that it is 95 millions of miles from the earth to the sun, and yet its heat is so great that it makes us want to get up on high ground. Now know that millions of inhabitants dwell there." Okay, millions of inhabitants dwell there. "The sun is filled with the glory of the gods," and of course it wasn't made in vain. I added that part. So this is from President Brigham Young's Doctrine on Deity, a Fred Collier compilation. Okay, so we have Oliver B. Huntington receiving his patriarchal blessing from his father William Huntington. And this was in December of 1836. It's recorded in the Patriarchal Blessing Book. And the text reads, "I lay my hands on thee and bless thee with a father's blessing. Before thou art 21, thou wilt be called to preach the fullness of the gospel. Thou shalt have power with God even to translate thyself to heaven," which kind of means to be taken up, kind of teleported into heaven, "and preach to the inhabitants of the moon." So that's interesting. And Oliver B. Huntington has another statement about the inhabitants on the moon as well. But this is from his patriarchal blessing. It says his dad told him he'll go up and preach to the inhabitants of the moon or to other planets. So doing missionary work on the moon or other planets, maybe in the solar system. "If it shall be expedient, if thou art faithful, all these blessings will be given thee." Okay, reason and revelation lead us to conclude that all these worlds and systems are adorned with displays of divine wisdom, and all these worlds and systems are peopled with myriads of rational inhabitants. So in other words, people like us, humans. This, according to Apostle Oliver Cowdery in the Messenger and Advocate, February 1837. Okay, another sermon from Prophet Brigham Young. He said, "Mankind are here because they are the offspring of parents, Adam and Eve, who were first brought here from another planet." So we had another quote regarding this, and now the prophet Brigham Young is saying Adam and Eve were brought here from another planet, and power was given them to propagate the species, and they were commanded to multiply and replenish the earth. This was a sermon given in 1859. Okay, so we have another patriarchal blessing from Joseph Smith Sr., Joseph Smith's father, and it's about doing missionary work on other planets, other worlds. This was in 1836, and a blessing to Jonathan Crosby, and he said, "Thou shalt be caught up to the third heavens, and behold unspeakable things, whether in the body or out, and when thy mission is full here, thou shalt visit other worlds." So in other words, doing missionary work on other worlds. This is Caroline Barnes Crosby Journal. Okay, so this is another interesting teaching from Prophet Brigham Young. He said when the earth was made or framed and brought into existence and man was placed upon it, it was near the throne of our Father in heaven, in other words, Kolob. So the earth was next to Kolob, brought into existence, man was placed upon it, and then when man fell, so in other words, I guess the fall of Adam and Eve, the earth fell into space. It was kind of pushed out into space and took up its abode in this planetary system. So it was right next to Kolob, then it fell or got pushed out into outer space into its current planetary system. And I've seen other quotes regarding this as well. And then he goes on and says, "And the sun became our light. This is the glory the earth came from. And when it is glorified, it will return again unto the presence of the Father. So the earth will be taken back and be next to Kolob, and it will dwell there, and these intelligent beings that I am looking at, if they live worthy of it, will dwell upon this earth. Another sermon in 1874. Okay, this is another kind of a strange teaching, and we've gone over this already a little bit, but apparently Joseph Smith taught that the 10 tribes were taken up into space and that they are not on this globe. A piece of the earth actually separated and went out into outer space, and they lived on that little mini planet, and then the 10 tribes will actually come back and join the earth again. So this is a statement from Bathsheba W. Smith in Recollections of the Prophet Joseph Smith in 1892, and she said, I heard him, who is Joseph Smith, say peradventure that the 10 tribes were not on this globe, so we're not going to find them, but a portion of this earth was cleaved off, so taken off with them, and went flying into space. So a little part of this planet went flying into outer space with the lost 10 tribes on it. And when the earth reels to and fro like a drunken man, and the stars from heaven fall, then that part that was taken off comes back again and would join again the earth. Here's another statement by Oliver B. Huntington. This was in the Young Woman's Journal, February 6, 1892. And it says, as far back as 1837, I know that he, Joseph Smith, who was the prophet, said that the moon was inhabited by men and women the same as this earth, and that they live to a greater age than we do, that they live generally to be near the age of 1,000 years. He described the men as averaging near 6 feet in height and dressing quite uniformly in something near the Quaker style. So this is very similar to the Philo Dibble statement. They were probably talking to each other. And then he says, in my patriarchal blessing given by the father of the prophet Joseph Smith, which was Joseph Smith Sr. in Kirtland, 1837, I was told that I should preach the gospel before I was 21 years of age. And we've already gone over this statement on a different slide, but here it is again. And that I should preach the gospel to the inhabitants upon the islands of the sea and to the inhabitants of the moon. So again, doing missionary work on the moon, even the planet that you can now behold with your eyes. Okay, so here's another statement from the prophet Brigham Young, 1876, a sermon. It's talking about how you can get your own planet after you become a god. It says, all those who are counted worthy to be exalted and to become gods, even the sons of God. Now, this is something that he got from Joseph Smith, how you can become a god and have your own spirit children, and then you will go forth and have earths and worlds, so basically your own planets, like those who framed this, and millions on millions of others. So you go forth, have your own earth, your own planet, and become a god and have your own spirit children. Here is another interesting statement by Orson F. Whitney. He went on to become an apostle. This was from Destiny of the Earth and Its Inhabitants, Collected Discourses, 1886. It says, it will shine among the stars, even as they shine, and give light unto us. They who inhabit those worlds that are above are those who have obeyed the laws by which those kingdoms are governed. This is a strange doctrine to the world, to speak of the planets above us as being inhabited. So you can see this was very common in the 19th century for Mormons. There's all kinds of accounts and statements to speak of the planets above us as being inhabited. It's strange to the world, but not to the Mormons. So they're inhabited by glorified beings who have been saved and exalted by obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ, or Mormonism. Okay, here we have a blessing given by Zebedee Coltrane to Wilford Woodruff, and he recorded part of it here in January 3rd, 1837 in his journal. He said that Zebedee pronounced great blessings upon my head by the spirit of prophecy and revelation. And among other things in the blessing, it said that he, that is Wilford Woodruff, should visit Kolob and preach to the spirits in prison, and that I should bring all of my friends or relatives forth from the terrestrial kingdom. So kind of preaching to them in the terrestrial kingdom. We're not sure if he meant being taken up from this earth to preach to Kolob, or if it's in the afterlife. It's still interesting. Okay, so here's an interesting statement by Apostle Orson Pratt, and he mentions a bunch of planets in our solar system, and that they were peopled by God, God's sons and daughters who should come to people these other worlds which he mentioned, and he mentions all the planets in our solar system. So let's read it. God, in constructing these materials into creations and worlds, had done it for a wise and noble purpose. The great purpose that he had in view was that intelligent beings should occupy these creations. So in other words, these planets should be occupied by humans. No law was given to our earth and its materials or to the planets. So no law was given to the earth or these other planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and the various asteroids, merely for the sake of giving laws. So the laws had a purpose, and they were for humans. But the Lord had a useful design in view, namely, to add to his own glory and to the happiness of millions of his sons and daughters. And here's the key part: who should come to people these other worlds which I have named. So all those planets he named in the solar system were peopled by God's sons and daughters. And this is from Orson Pratt, the Apostle's Wonders of the Universe collection, which came out in 1937. Okay, so here's another patriarchal blessing by Joseph Smith Sr., first presiding patriarch, December 15, 1836, and this was to Lorenzo Snow, who later went on to become the prophet. And Joseph told Lorenzo that thou shalt have power to translate thyself, which is kind of like teleporting. You're going up into space. Thou shalt have power to translate thyself from one planet to another planet, and power to go to the moon, if thou shalt desire. Thou shalt have power like Enoch to translate thyself to heaven, which is just basically just flying through space at a fast rate, kind of like teleporting. Okay, a statement by Apostle Erastus Snow. But what is the rule or measure of time by which God reckons his labor and his work? Is it the time measured to the inhabitants of Mars? So, interesting statement. Is it the time measured to the inhabitants of Mars? So he's just assuming that Mars is populated. Or the little planet Mercury that describes its revolution around our sun in less than 3 months and counts out 4 of its years, while we upon the earth are counting 1. So, interesting statement about inhabitants of Mars. Journal of Discourses, 1878. Okay, another statement by the Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith in the Improvement Era article again. And he's talking about Abraham being a great scientist and a great astronomer, perhaps the greatest that the world has ever seen. He knew more about the stars, their times and seasons, than all the other astronomers of this enlightened age put together. And this was around 1920. The Lord revealed to him many great truths pertaining to the other earths and the inhabitants thereof. So he's probably getting this from the book of Abraham. So Abraham revealed many truths about other earths and the inhabitants thereof. And by Urim and Thummim, he was able to see them in a manner far beyond the scope of modern devices for the study of the heavens. So he's saying that the Urim and Thummim, which is pictured here, I guess it's pictured here as being kind of glasses that you wear on your eye. There's other variations of interpretations of what it looked like as well. But he's basically saying the Urim and Thummim was a way better type of telescope than what they had in the 1920s. And he would probably say even of the modern age. All right, another statement here by the Apostle Orson Pratt. And he's talking about when we become a spirit. So I guess when we die, we shed the body. Our spirit leaves the body. We can actually travel at the speed of light, because the spirit is basically light, or similar to light. And light obviously travels at the speed of light. And so our spirit could travel at the speed of light as well, and we could visit all kinds of places in the universe. So he says, we would not want to occupy 3 months' time in going from the earth to the moon. That would take too long. Or from the earth to the sun, as we do in crossing these plains with ox teams. But we wish to go with greater velocity. If we go with the velocity of light, speed of light, we should travel at the rate of 192,000 miles every second, which I think that's about right. So they even knew this back in 1854. What is it that moves with this velocity? Is it anything else but spirit? The light we see is spirit. The light that comes from the sun is spirit. So that's interesting, that light is actually spirit. How fast does that spirit travel? It can be demonstrated that it can travel at 192,000 miles per second. Thus we shall be able to accomplish and perform a greater amount of righteousness among other worlds and beings. So we'd be able to travel there fast at the speed of light, go to other worlds, accomplish amazing feats of righteousness. Then if we were compelled to lose 3/4 or 9/10 of our time on the journey, so much, much slower. Okay, so according to Wilford Woodruff's journal, March 30, 1873, the city of Enoch was in the Gulf of Mexico and then was taken up. So let's read this statement. Joseph Smith also said that when the city of Enoch fled and was translated, basically taken up into space, the whole city, it was where the Gulf of Mexico now is. It left that gulf a body of water instead. So it's kind of the same idea as the Lost 10 Tribes. There was this whole city. It got taken up and left this big hole, this big gap of the Gulf of Mexico. And so part of the earth actually was taken into space, and that's where the city of Enoch was. Okay, another statement here by the Apostle Orson Pratt on how we can form and create our own planet, or planets. We can have more than one, maybe. As our Father and God begat us, sons and daughters, so will we rise immortal, males and females, and beget children, and in our turn form and create worlds, our own planets basically, and send forth our spirit children to inherit those worlds. The same as we were sent here, and thus will the works of God continue, and not only God himself and his Son Jesus Christ have the power of endless lives, but all of his redeemed offspring, which is us, if we are worthy. And if we make it to the celestial kingdom and become gods, we can have our own planet. Apostle Orson Pratt, Journal of Discourses, Sermon, 1871. And then later on, the Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith said basically the same thing in the Doctrines of Salvations. I believe this was in the 1950s, maybe the 1960s. The Father has promised us that through our faithfulness, we shall be blessed with the fullness of his kingdom. So what is a fullness? In other words, we will have the privilege of becoming like him. To become like him, we must have all of the powers of godhood. So we become a god. Thus a man and his wife, when glorified, will have spirit children who will eventually go on an earth, so basically our own planet, like this one that we are on, and pass through the same kind of experiences, being subject to mortal conditions, except these will be our own spirit offspring, so we will be the gods. And if faithful, then they also will receive the fullness of exaltation and partake of the same blessings as us. So it's like one eternal round. There is no end to this development. It will go on forever. We will become gods and have jurisdiction over worlds. So your own planet or your own planets. And these worlds will be peopled by our own offspring. So our heavenly offspring, our spirit offspring. And we will have an endless eternity for this. Sounds kind of cool. Okay, so a statement by the prophet Joseph Smith about what translation means. Basically, it's teleportation. But he says here in the history of the church, many have supposed that the doctrine of translation was a doctrine whereby men were taken immediately into the presence of God and into an eternal fullness. But this is a mistaken idea. Their place of habitation is that of a terrestrial order, so kind of in the middle kingdom, and a place prepared for such characters he held in reserve to be ministering angels unto many planets. So maybe like the people in the city of Enoch, taken up, translated into space, and become missionaries or ministering angels unto many different planets before they have their final glory in their celestialized world, and who as yet have not entered into so great a fullness as those who are resurrected from the dead. So here's another account of Joseph Smith mentioning the lost 10 tribes going up first to the North Pole and then being taken out into outer space as kind of a little mini planet. So let's read this. He told me that the prophet Joseph said to him that at the North Pole there is a convex or cup-shaped depression with the deepest sea resting there. So kind of this this little portion, this little convex or cup-shaped depression where part of the earth used to be but was taken into outer space along with the lost 10 tribes on it. The planet that belonged to that part of the world would in time return to its place, striking the earth at that part. So that part of the planet would come back and make the earth kind of whole again, completing the sphere. The result would be a reeling to and fro like a drunken man. So this is another account of that of the lost 10 tribes. First going up to the North Pole, then a part of the earth being taken off, and then floating out into outer space. Okay, another statement by the Apostle Orson Pratt, this in the Seer of 1854. It's regarding the translation of the city of Enoch again. However far the Zion of Enoch may be from the earth's appointed orbit, so how far out in outer space it is certain according to the promise of God that it will return again to the earth at the second coming of Christ. We can hardly believe that this city was taken away beyond the limits of the solar system. So he's saying it was actually taken up out of the solar system, out into outer space. All right, we have a really good statement here from Hiram Smith. This was Joseph Smith's brother, recorded in the George Lobb Diary, 1843. In my Father's universe are many worlds, and I will go and prepare a place there for you. If there are many worlds, then there must be many gods. For every star that we see is a world and is inhabited, the same as this world is peopled. So every star that we see is a world and it is inhabited. Every single one. The same as this world is peopled, the same as the earth. The sun and the moon are inhabited. So here he is agreeing with the other statements by Oliver Huntington, etc., that Joseph Smith said that the sun and the moon are inhabited, and Brigham Young did also. So the sun and the moon are inhabited, and so are the stars. The stars are inhabited the same as this earth, but many of them are larger than this earth. They are under the same order as this earth is undergoing, and undergoing the same changes. The foolish understand not these things, for this world was patterned after the former world, or after mansions above. So maybe it was patterned after similar planets or patterned after Kolob. This is Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith's brother. Okay, so we have a simple statement here from the Apostle Parley P. Pratt. He wrote a great book called Key to the Science of Theology in 1855. And he said, gods, angels, and men are all of one species, one race, one great family, widely diffused among the planetary systems. Widely diffused among the planetary systems. So maybe in our solar system and beyond. And they are colonies, kingdoms, nations, etc. Okay, so here's another statement. It's kind of a tidbit of information. It's about the earth being made out of the fragments of other earths. Apparently Joseph Smith said that. Years ago, Brother Oliver B. Huntington told me, I guess that's Matthew W. Dalton, that the prophet Joseph Smith said that the earth had been made out of the fragments of other earths, but that the world in general was not yet prepared for this kind of knowledge. So that's kind of a weird statement. All right, so Bruce R. McConkie also mentioned that the planets and worlds were inhabited. In the Millennial Messiah of 1982, he said, with reference to the various kingdoms of his creating, to the planets and worlds that roll in their orbits, inhabited as they are with the children of the Father. So he mentions that the kingdoms, the planets, the worlds, they're all inhabited. Okay, so we have John A. Widstow in his book, Joseph Smith as Scientist, 1908. He went on to become an apostle, and he's talking about D&C 130 here. And he says, it is perhaps less surprising to find that Joseph Smith believed that there are other peopled worlds than ours. Other peopled worlds than ours. For instance, the reckoning of God's time, angels' time, prophets' time, and man's time is according to the planet on which they reside, which distinctly implies that other planets are inhabited. So he's basically saying that Joseph Smith was saying that other planets are inhabited. Another passage reads that angels do not reside on a planet like this earth, but they reside in the presence of God on a globe like a sea of glass and fire. Some more accounts of where the lost 10 tribes went. This is from Charles Lowell Walker's diary. And the first one here, February 1881, at night, went to prayer meeting. Some remarks were made by Sister Green, stating that she heard Eliza Snow speak of the 9.5 lost tribes being on an orb, which is basically a planet. So the lost 10 tribes on a different planet, and would eventually come back to their former place, and we should know when they came by certain signs. And then she'll mention those in a different entry here. Then in March 1881, Brother Jacob Gates said he heard Joseph Smith say concerning the 10 lost tribes, they are hid from us by land and by air. So they're up in the air. They are hid from us in such a manner and at such an angle that the astronomers cannot get their telescopes to bear on them from this earth. So that means they're up in space. And then also in March, paid Sister Eliza R. Snow a short visit. She heard the prophet Joseph say that the 10 tribes were taken away on an orb or planet by themselves. So they were up there in the North Pole, and then part of the earth got torn off, taken away, and that became their own orb or their own planet, and that's where they are. Probably even to this day, and I guess they'll come back maybe in the second coming of Christ. And then it goes on and says, and when they returned with the portion of this earth that was taken away with them, the coming together of these two bodies, so their planet rejoining the Earth's planet, the coming together of these two bodies or orbs would cause a shock. She also stated that he said the Earth was 90, that is 90 times smaller than when first created or organized, because I guess pieces were flying off of it. Okay, another statement by the Apostle Parley P. Pratt, Key to the Science of Theology book, 1855. All these are so many colonies of our race, multiplied, extended, transplanted, and existing forever and ever, as occupants of the numberless planetary systems. So, occupants of the numberless planetary systems out there, I guess, in space, solar system, universe, which do now exist, or which will roll into order, so new ones created, and be peopled by the operations of the Holy Spirit. Okay, an article here from the Latter-day Saints Millennial Star, July 10, 1882. It was entitled, Are the Worlds Inhabited? So later in the 19th century, when science began replacing supposition regarding an inhabited moon, Mormons refused to give up their belief, which they believe was rooted in revelation. So here we have this article in 1882. They're trying to defend the Mormon position against the advances made by science because they want to believe that the moon is inhabited. So this is just more proof of what they believed. So the article said, to the question, is the moon inhabited? Astronomers have returned a definite negative answer. So that's what science was saying. It has been claimed that the moon is a dead world without atmosphere, without vegetation, without moisture, and consequently without inhabitants. On this subject, the Latter-day Saints have the advantage of a little bit of definite information. So basically revelation. Remember, this is 1882 before they started to give this up. So they had the advantage of a little definite information that by him and through him and of him the worlds are and were created, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God. D&C 76. And then it says, just point blank, the worlds are inhabited, millions of them. The worlds are inhabited. They form the abode of the offspring of deity, birthplaces, probationary planets, prison houses, spirit spheres, paradises, Gehennas, homes for the resurrected, glorified sons for perfected and celestialized intelligences, all moving in their respective orbits, governed by fixed laws adapted to their condition and that of their inhabitants. So first generation Mormons resisted any changes in their cosmological concepts, so that took a little more time. To them, these were not just ideas or theories, they explained reality as they knew it. All right, we have another statement here by John A. Widstow, Joseph Smith as Scientist book, A Contribution to Mormon Philosophy. Interesting stuff back in the day. And he said, while the idea that the planets and stars may be inhabited is not at all new, yet it is interesting to note that Joseph Smith taught as an absolute truth that such is the case. All right, so here is an article by Truman G. Madsen, The Meaning of Christ, BYU Studies, 1975, and he's talking about B.H. Roberts' book, The Truth, the Way, the Life, which was an interesting and controversial book that came out around the time. And he says in the most controversial chapters of the book, Roberts follows the analogy of intercontinental transportation, so one continent to another, to the possibility of interplanetary travel, so going from one planet to another. From that premise lies the conjectures that life or life forms may have been brought from other worlds to ours, and that's what people like Brigham Young said. And his private opinion was that this world is only one of many previous worlds inhabited by myriads of forms of life and controlled by superior intelligences, and that whole races may have come and gone, and I think Joseph Smith said that too. Whole races may have come and gone in these earlier stages from the elements that comprise these earths. Okay, so we have Dr. Henry Eyring. He's currently in the First Presidency of the Church. He's doing a little bit of an apologetic piece here. He says, now what about the prophet Joseph Smith? I don't know whether he said men live on the moon or not, but whether he did or not troubles me not in the least. Well, it should. A prophet is wonderful because he sometimes speaks for the Lord. Sometimes. This occurs on certain occasions when the Lord wills it. This is his book, The Faith of a Scientist, 1989. Okay, Parley P. Pratt again, talking about the future. This is a long one. Planets will be visited, messages communicated, acquaintances and friendships formed, and he's talking interplanetary. And the sciences vastly extended and cultivated. The science of geography will then be extended to millions of worlds and will embrace a knowledge of their physical features and boundaries, the attainments of their inhabitants in the science of government, so all these places inhabited, their progress is revealed, or their progress in revealed religion, their employments, dress, manners, customs, etc. System after system will rise to view in the vast field of research and exploration. Sounds pretty good. Vast systems of suns and their attendant worlds, so he's kind of comparing it to our solar system, on which the eyes of Adam's race, that's us, in their rudimental sphere, have never gazed, will then be contemplated, circumscribed, weighed in the balance of human thought, their circumference and diameter be ascertained, their relative distances understood, their motions and revolutions, their times and laws. It will, in its vast compilations, embrace and include all nations, all ages, and all generations, all the planetary systems, so all the planets out there in space, in all their varied progress and changes. It will trace our race in all of its successive immigrations, colonies, states, kingdoms, and empires. Now, you have to remember that they believe that all these inhabitants on all these different planets were basically the same race, the race of God. They were humans. They looked like God, created in His image. From their first existence on the great central governing planet, or the sun, called Kolob, because you have to remember they used to say that Earth, when it was first created, was right next to Kolob, until they are increased without number and widely dispersed and transplanted from one planet to another. Apostle Parley P. Pratt, Key to the Science of Theology, 1855. Some pretty heady stuff. Okay, the Book of Mormon musical, I Believe song, premiered in 2011. I believe that God has a plan for all of us. I believe that plan involves me getting my own planet. I believe that God lives on a planet called Kolob, and I believe that Jesus has His own planet as well. Okay, we have a little bit of apologetics here from Stephen W. Gibson. He's a Mormon. His book was 1 Minute Answers to Anti-Mormon Questions, which I guess came out in 1995. And he said, at the present time, man has no scientific or revealed knowledge of whether or not there are inhabitants on the Earth's moon. Now, that's just a straight-up lie. We know that there are no inhabitants on the moon. The fact that a handful of astronauts didn't see any inhabitants in the tiny area they viewed when they landed on the moon decades ago certainly gives no definitive information, any more than visitors to Earth who might land in a barren Death Valley would have any idea of the billions of inhabitants elsewhere. So he's still holding out that, hey, maybe the moon still is inhabited. Maybe there still is people on the moon. And maybe he's agreeing that Joseph Smith did say that there are people on the moon, and maybe he's agreeing that Brigham Young said the same thing. Okay, a couple of funny pictures here to end. Moon Quakers established 1837. So you see somebody in an astronaut suit with Quaker oatmeal head on it. Kind of funny. And this one we see an astronaut with the Book of Mormon. And turns out there's already Quakers on the moon, so we better go up there and convert them to Mormonism. Kind of funny. And that will do it for this video. And I thank you for watching. Mormons, Moonmen, and other space inhabitants.